Hasn't it happened to you that at 3 a.m. you find the longest, strangest, and most detailed video on a topic that seems to make no sense? But the more you think about it, the more answers it's giving you the most basic doubts of your life. And now it's almost 7 in the morning and you have to finish this video as fast as possible because you need people to know the truth? Because to me, it happened to me. SpongeBob is a very colorful and light-hearted show where a sponge named Bob and his friends, a squirrel, a starfish, and a squid, have underwater adventures ranging from the day-to-day life of a cook, having a fun day, or killing God. But that's all a lie. The thing is that by the time you start to look at some details more closely, there are certain things that once you notice, you could never forget. For example, why was there only one gorilla in an episode? But not just a land animal at the bottom of the sea, but a talking gorilla, and clearly we can see the eyes under the gorilla's mask, along with his horse, who we also see as another man in disguise. It's especially weird because they are clearly real humans. It's hard to rationalize what they will go do after that. It's something that leaves you wondering if you're as conspiratorial as I am. I mean, they're human. Besides, it seems that they are not even the first humans in bikini bottoms, because there are already, if you want to count the manatee and mermanic barnacle, who are the same size as small fish, apart from the fact that there is fire underwater, cars, heat for the grills, and so on and so forth. Yes, as soon as you notice one detail, the whole world of the series starts to fall apart. Or, well, that's what was noticed 3 years ago by Doug Woolever's channel, who uploaded an hour-long video featuring one of the most bizarre, obscure, but most meaningful ideas that completely changes as we see bikini bottoms, only to never upload another video as a Giga Chat ever again. This doesn't mean that they believe this theory 100%, but it is such a good explanation to the world of SpongeBob that I just had to talk about it. We are talking about the skin theory, but before we get into an in-depth analysis, we have to define what exactly we are talking about. Each instance of skin theory is defined by a moment where some character removes a body part, disguises himself as another sea animal, or demonstrates that there is something else underneath one of his limbs. They sound like very specific rules on which to base an entire world-changing theory of SpongeBob SquarePants. Are there really that many examples to make a video on the subject? Yes. It all starts in one of the strangest moments in the entire series. In the episode Dying for Cakes, we have a rather curious moment, where making up for Squidward's attempted murder of Bob, the squid decides to spend the day with him, fulfilling several of his whims. Among them, walking him around the city wearing a salmon suit. This image, besides being quite funny without context, brings us a doubt. We know that in this series, all the characters are about marine animals, as we have children, adults, and midlife crisis workers, so it is not so insane to assume that these are about the equivalent of humans in the series. So why would anyone have a hyper-realistic costume of a person, and why doesn't anyone seem to react to that? This isn't the only point of such a suit making an appearance. In the classic episode Chocolate with Nuts, the fish that tricks them takes off his gauze and casts in a very swift fashion with a zipper. But it's when he takes off the suit that we can see that the zipper also goes through his skin and mouth. He's literally taking off a hyper-realistic disguise of himself. And yes, this could obviously pass as a simple surreal joke, but it's just that these are building up. And everything changes completely with the next track. In Copycat Crab, near the beginning of the episode, while SpongeBob is completely paranoid, he approaches a customer, ripping his head off, mistaking him for a plankton robot, which reveals a smaller head of a different color underneath. Leaving aside that the fake head can talk, blink, and confuse that real Corona upon being discovered, he comments, "Everyone at the head enhancement clinic told me no one would notice." He reveals to us that the weird thing is not that they got a hyper-realistic suit, but that specifically in this world there are places to enhance certain limbs. And yes, maybe if it only happened once it would be a weird joke and that's it, but we have another much more interesting example. This is Dr. Gilliam, a purple fish who serves as a supporting character in several episodes. At first glance, he looks like any other. There is nothing that stands out about him, except for his appearance in the first season episode where, unlike his friends or other appearances, we see him with different colored human arms. I repeat, human arms. It's a fish face with brown arms underneath. And come to think of it, it's very similar to our mysterious crustacean client, with smaller limbs of other colors that would later be swapped out for more suitable ones. But this synthetic limbs thing opens up a whole new layer of craziness. If we decide to explore it further, the heads and arms were just the beginning. For example, in the episode Paying Doom from the 3rd season, Patrick and SpongeBob dress up as cops, literally wearing suits that disguise them as taller, skinnier fish that would fool anyone. And if that wasn't enough, when the real cops arrive, they get their faces ripped off and the guys are still normal. More than anything else, the cops look annoyed. And no, this is not the only example of synthetic fur, but of those there are so many that it would simply turn into another hour-long video, so we will try to show some of the strangest ones. In No Little Ones Allowed, Arenita arrives with Salty's spittoon guard, rips off his tattoo and flips him over to show how tough she is. Although the fish reacted by screaming, the hole in its skin was easily repaired, and they do it again. And if we take a closer look at Arenita, we will see that she is no stranger to this concept, for under her spacesuit, we find more of that strange human anatomy that hides under the fish. And even speaking of our protagonists, in the episode of Karate Cutters, when SpongeBob fights Arenita as a surprise attack, he uses a prosthetic tongue that allows him to speak without any problem or bring suspicion. Along with the fact that he can elongate it in an exaggerated way. Again, these are details that no one notices, jokes between episodes, but when you put them all together, you notice that several of the examples come out of the first 4 seasons, and it seems that they are no longer just jokes. They seem to indicate that there is something very, very strange with the anatomy of the supposed fish. And if you don't believe me, as a last point we have the episode I Had an Accident. It's a weird chapter with a capital R, not only because of the tree in a diving suit, Patricio dying at the beginning of the episode, or even the Dr. Fish with the weird arms. What we are interested in is the ending. The gorilla attack I mentioned at the beginning? We start by seeing Patricio clearly disguised as a gorilla, trying to scare Sandy as part of his plan to get SpongeBob out of the house, where he's sitting on the floor talking to a napkin, a potato, and a penny. It's a weird episode. At that point, a second Patrick arrives, confusing them both, who reveals himself to be a gorilla in disguise, which gives us some pretty interesting points, because the gorilla is wearing not a starfish costume or something similar, but a Patrick costume, which might explain why several of the fish we see are about more disguises. Along with this, we have that the moment he steps out of the costume, his size increases considerably, like Bob and Patrick inside the police costumes. And the interesting part follows. When SpongeBob is asked the obvious question, what would a gorilla do underwater? The gorilla gets weird, nervous, talking directly to the main characters and looking for his horse, who is clearly another person in disguise, and tells him that they were discovered, so they decide to run away from there. So here we have, in the strangest way, the culmination of several elements that create the theory: realistic disguises, replacement of people, human arms, and inconsistencies with logic flaws as we find ourselves under the sea. And just when you think this is too little, believe me, there are many more examples we haven't shown. SpongeBob burning a lady's face at the movies but not affecting her too much, SpongeBob removing his skin to reveal another SpongeBob underneath, or even using his breath, managing to break a letter carrier fish to reveal 2 other fish underneath, as if breaking the suit. But even with all the examples, isolated clips, and even entire episodes where using a costume to fool everyone becomes part of the plot, like when SpongeBob disguises himself as Mr. Krabs, or when he has to get inflatable armbands that to no one seem strange. And despite all the evidence that this society is hiding more than just hyper-realistic costumes, you'll notice that we still haven't cleared up the most important thing. Why does this matter? There's one last issue with skin theory being able to completely change how the series has been presented since the beginning, and perhaps more importantly, finally answering several of the biggest questions about this show. In his video, Jug lays out a few reasons that could explain why his theory is true. The first is that all these costumes and weird stuff are either for ritualistic purposes or due to mass hysteria, which really doesn't square so well with everything we've seen. But the one that really makes it all worthwhile is a new and deranged idea. What if the whole show we've seen is about humans dressed as fish? Okay, if you're still here, really either forget to remove the video when you put it in the background, or you're really interested in the topic, so as Milhouse said,
let's go crazy Broadway style!
The obvious question is, how the hell can they be human if they are underwater? The thing is, there are certain elements in the show that ironically make more sense if we take that detail out of the equation. as with the clowns underwater, the fish eating crab burgers, the underwater fire, the suspiciously terrestrial gravity, the fish catching other fish, Sirenoman and Barnacle Boy, and all the other suspicious details we notice in this universe. According to this theory, all this would be because they are not really underwater. All this would be because SpongeBob SquarePants is a show in which all its characters are human beings living in a city where they used to wear hyper-realistic costumes. Of course, as the series progressed and its original crew began to retire, more and more evidence of sea life began to appear. However, you have to admit that even as ridiculous as it sounds at first glance, at this point in the video, you have to at least understand that several of the jokes in the series are pretty bizarre, even in the context of a children's series. Removing body parts, replacing them, or even enhancing them are things you'd expect in Cyberpunk, not SpongeBob. Anyway, the last comment made by the creator of the theory says that if you can't see if it's that in theory it's satire or not, fine. What is not clear to me if after watching an hour-long video, in the end it might be just a joke. So I made this video in revenge to leave you with that existential doubt, because even if you know this is a children's show, the evidence is there, and it's enough to accuse a friend of an existential crisis if you catch him off guard when you reveal to him that his favorite childhood show is just the biggest furry convention ever animated.